You are on your knees in the sand. The heat burns through your skin until it feels like fire beneath your bones. A metal collar cuts into your neck, pulled so tight that every breath feels shallow. A chain runs from your throat to the women beside you. 11 others. You hear shaking breaths. Someone sobs quietly. Another woman whispers a prayer in a language you don't know. Then a shadow moves over you. For a brief moment, the sun is blocked and the heat eases. That moment ends when rough hands grab your face. Your mouth is forced open. Fingers push past your teeth, press down your tongue, scrape your gums until you gag. He doesn't stop. He studies your eyes, pulls your lip down, inspects you the way a buyer inspects an animal. Because that is what you are now. 12 days ago, you were the daughter of a village leader in the Sahel. 12 days ago, your mother spoke your name every morning. She is dead now. You watched her die. And you kept walking because men with swords made the rules clear. Stop, and you join her. In Arabic, there is a word for what you have become. Jaria. Slave girl. But that word hides the truth. It really means your body is no longer yours. Your future belongs to whoever pays. Your past has already been erased. The man steps back after inspecting you. He gives a short nod. Another man opens a leather pouch, and you hear the dull clink of coins. Hands exchange money. Just like that, your life changes owners again. This is the third time you've been sold in a single month. No one asks your name. No one cares where you came from. To them, you are not a person with a past. You are an object moving along a route that has existed for centuries. This is the Arab slave trade. It did not happen in secret. It operated openly across deserts, ports, and cities for more than 1,300 years. Between the 7th century and the modern age, millions of Africans were taken from their homes and moved north and east. North Africa, the Middle East, the Arabian Peninsula. The numbers are staggering. At least 14 million people, and possibly many more. Records were poorly kept. Deaths along the way were rarely counted. People who died on the road were not considered losses. They were expected. You may have learned about the Atlantic slave trade. Ships crossing the ocean, plantations in the Americas. That history has museums, books, films, and memorials. It is discussed openly, but this trade was older and longer. It began shortly after Arab armies spread across North Africa and continued into the 20th century. Saudi Arabia did not officially ban slavery until 1962. Mauritania followed in 1981. These dates are not ancient. There are people alive today who were born into societies where this system still existed. Yet this history is rarely discussed. Not because it was smaller, but because it was designed differently. The goal was not just control. It was disappearance. A system built not only to exploit human beings, but to ensure they left no trace behind. And that design worked with terrifying precision. If you look at the world today, the silence becomes impossible to ignore. In the Americas, tens of millions of people are living descendants of enslaved Africans. Their faces, cultures, and communities are proof of what happened. Their presence keeps that history alive. In the Middle East and North Africa, after more than 1,000 years of importing millions of Africans, there is almost nothing, a few small communities here and there. Isolated families, tiny populations where there should be millions. This absence is not an accident. It is the result of deliberate choices made over centuries. The men were destroyed first. African men taken through this trade were systematically castrated. This is not rumor or exaggeration. It appears again and again in historical records from different regions and time periods. Traders removed the ability to reproduce because reproduction meant future generations, and future generations meant memory, identity, and resistance. Castration was carried out at specific points along the routes. Some locations became infamous for it. Survival rates were low. For every man who lived through the procedure, several others died from bleeding, infection, or shock. Their bodies were buried in sand or left where they fell. Their deaths were accepted as part of the cost. The logic behind it was brutal but simple. A castrated man could not form a family. He could not pass down language, stories, or names. He would work until his body failed, then disappear. When one died, another would replace him. No sons, no daughters, no descendants to remember him. Over hundreds of years, this erased entire bloodlines, but the women were treated differently. They were kept alive because their bodies served another purpose. They were valued not as people, but as vessels. Their ability to bear children made them useful, but only in a way that still ensured erasure. What happened to them is often hidden behind polite words in historical texts, hinted at rather than described. But the meaning is clear. Their survival was never meant to preserve who they were. It was meant to consume them slowly, until nothing of their original identity remained. This system did not survive for centuries by accident. It was powered by money, trade, and carefully built networks. Arab merchants did not usually raid villages themselves. Instead, they created markets that rewarded others for doing it. Weapons flowed into Africa. Guns, metal tools, luxury cloth, salt. In return, human beings. Over time, entire regions were reshaped around this trade. African rulers learned that selling captives brought wealth and power. Raids became routine. Wars were fought not for land, but for people. Kingdoms rose and fell around this economy. In West Africa, states like Dahomey built their strength on yearly slave raids against neighboring communities. In East Africa, the Sultanate of Zanzibar controlled coastal routes and became one of the largest hubs in the Indian Ocean world. Along the Nile, powerful sultanates dominated the flow north. Across the Sahara, Tuareg groups controlled the desert paths. Each group took a share of profit. Each depended on a steady supply of bodies. Villages were attacked before sunrise, when people were asleep and defenses were weak. The assault was fast and overwhelming. Men who fought back were killed on the spot. Those who surrendered were judged immediately. Strength, age, health. Young men were separated for sale or castration. Older men with no value were often killed where they stood. Women and girls were pulled aside and examined with different calculations in mind. Age mattered most. Girls too young were considered costly to maintain. Women too old were worth less. The most desired were usually between their early teens and mid-20s, strong enough to survive the journey. Young enough for many years of use. Appearance affected price. Traders knew which features sold higher in which markets. Ethiopian women were often valued above others and sold for far higher prices. Those chosen were sometimes given slightly better food or protection, not out of mercy, but because damaged merchandise reduced profit. Families were torn apart in moments. Children ripped from mothers. Husbands dragged away from wives. Screams filled the air as chains were tightened and people were pulled in opposite directions. Witnesses wrote that these sounds were unbearable, that they echoed long after the raids ended. For the victims, there was no last goodbye, no chance to know what happened to the people they loved. Those bonds were cut clean, never to be restored. After the chains were locked and the families torn apart, the long walk began. For many, this was where hope finally broke. The routes across Africa were not just paths. They were corridors of death, worn into the land by centuries of suffering. The worst of them led north, across the Sahara Desert. This journey was not measured in distance. It was measured in who survived. Imagine walking for months in chains, under a sun that burns skin until it splits. The desert offered no shade, no mercy. During the day, the heat rose so high that the sand itself burned. At night, the temperature dropped so sharply that bodies shook uncontrollably. The same land that roasted people by day froze them by night. Many died from the shock alone. Water was controlled with cruel calculation. Camels drank first because camels were valuable. They carried goods. They were expensive. Slaves were cheaper. Slaves were replaceable. Whatever water remained went to the people, often just a few mouthfuls. Lips cracked and bled. Tongues swelled. Throats burned. The knowledge that there were hundreds of miles still ahead broke the strongest minds. Food was barely enough to keep legs moving. Dried dates, sometimes a little meat. Never enough to keep bodies strong. Those who collapsed were left behind. There was no stopping to help, no burial, no prayers. The caravan moved on, and the desert swallowed whoever fell. Over time, the routes became lined with bones. Explorers later wrote about valleys covered in skeletons, skulls bleaching under the sun, paths where stepping without crushing remains was impossible. These were not ancient bones, they were fresh. New additions to trails that had been collecting the dead for over 1,000 years. By the time the caravans reached the northern markets, entire groups had vanished. Some caravans lost a quarter of their captives. Some lost half. Survival was not strength. It was luck. And for the women who made it through, the desert was only the beginning of what they would lose next. Reaching the cities did not mean safety. It only meant the dying had paused. The women who survived the desert arrived thin, silent, and emptied of strength, but the system was ready for them. Slave markets in the Arab world had been refined for centuries. Cairo's market had operated almost continuously for over 1,000 years. Zanzibar processed tens of thousands every year at its peak. These were not chaotic places. They were organized, efficient, and merciless. Markets were divided by purpose. Laborers in one section, skilled workers in another, domestic servants in another. And behind screens, away from public view, were the women meant for private buyers. The examinations were slow and exact. Teeth were checked first. Teeth revealed age and health. Skin was examined for scars or illness. Hair was judged. Bodies were measured with the same cold attention used for animals. Buyers paid more if they could see everything clearly. European visitors who witnessed this left written accounts so disturbing that many were censored when published. One observer wrote that the women were forced to move, turn, and display themselves in ways that could not be repeated in polite language. Prices varied greatly. Ordinary women sold for modest sums. Young women with preferred features sold for more. Some were purchased quietly by agents representing powerful households, never even entering the public auction. Zanzibar became the largest hub of this trade in the Indian Ocean world. Its economy revolved around human bodies. Missionaries who saw it firsthand said no description could capture the horror. One wrote that the scene stayed with him forever, that he tried to forget them, but never could. Even when markets were officially closed, the trade did not stop. It went underground. Ships sailed at night. Deals were made in hidden courtyards. Demand was too strong and profit was too high. Where demand exists, supply finds a way. And for the women sold in those markets, their future now depended entirely on who had bought them. For the women who were bought, life split into different kinds of captivity. Some were taken to great houses and palaces. The wealthiest men built harems that held dozens, sometimes hundreds of women. Ottoman sultans kept entire cities of women hidden behind walls. The imperial palace in Constantinople held thousands at different times. To the outside world, these places were surrounded by mystery. Inside, they were places of constant fear and competition. A woman who entered a harem lost everything she had been. Her name was taken away. A new one was given. Her language was forbidden. Her religion was replaced. Her past was treated as if it never existed. She was trained in how to walk, how to speak, how to lower her eyes, how to serve, how to survive. Every movement was watched. Every mistake was punished. The goal was simple: break the old person. Build a new one who belonged completely to her owner. Some women learned to navigate this world. A very small number gained influence. If a woman bore a son to a powerful man, her status could change. The mother of a future ruler could become powerful beyond imagination. History remembers a few of these women because they were rare. Their stories survived because they were exceptions. But for every one of them, thousands lived and died without a name, used until they were no longer useful, then replaced. Most women never saw palaces. They were taken to ordinary homes. They cooked. They cleaned. They raised children that were not theirs. They were called whenever their owner wanted them. There was no choice, no refusal, no escape. Law offered protection only after a woman became pregnant, and even then, it depended on whether the law was respected. Before that, she was property. Nothing more. Children born from these unions were free by law, but they grew up in the culture of their fathers. Their mother's language disappeared. Her songs vanished. Her stories were never told. Over generations, African identity faded, blended, and finally vanished. This was the final stage of erasure. Not just the woman, not just her life, but every trace of her existence, erased until no one could remember she had ever been there. The Arab slave trade did not end with a great declaration or a moment of justice. There was no single day when chains were broken and people were set free. It ended slowly, reluctantly, pushed by outside pressure rather than inner change. British ships began blocking routes along the East African coast. Treaties were signed under threat. Colonial governments shut down desert crossings. One by one, countries were forced to make slavery illegal. But the system faded quietly, leaving almost no trace behind. And that is the true legacy: absence. Today in the Middle East and North Africa, there are almost no descendants of the millions who were taken there. The men were castrated and left no children. The women's children were absorbed into new societies until their African roots disappeared completely. Their names vanished. Their languages died with them. Their songs were never passed on. Their stories were never told. In the desert, archaeologists still find bones, mass graves, skeletons with no names, no records, no families left to remember them. People who died on the road and were simply left behind as the caravan moved on, no markers, no memorials, just sand covering what remains. The Atlantic slave trade left millions of descendants who keep memory alive. This trade left silence. 14 million people erased so completely that the world barely knows they existed. But they did exist. Each one was someone's daughter, someone who laughed, someone who had a name before it was taken away, someone who loved and was loved once. Remember her. Not as a number, not as a statistic. Remember her as a human being who deserved a life. That is the only memorial most of them will ever have.